Hi everyone, I'm Gabby. I was in the graduating class of 2018. I'm originally from Western Victoria and was an undergraduate at Monash. I did my third year in Warragul and then my fourth year all in South Gippsland with a couple of rotations up to Warragul and Traralgon, because the model I did was slightly different to what it is now. I'm currently working at Peninsula Health. Actually, I did my internship and my second year as a critical care HMO here, and I'm moving to Monash next year to do the anaesthetic senior resident job. But long-term plan to go back to the country. It's just quite difficult to find junior jobs in anaesthesia outside of Melbourne. So, but that's long term. I don't want to stay in the city, and I'll definitely move back rurally to practice.
I'm Katie. I am a current intern at Bendigo Health. I graduated last year, started off in Gabby's cohort, but went travelling for a year. So here I am. I was in the ERC cohort. I grew up in Melbourne, and when I got into med school, got into the ERC cohort, and that took me to Bendigo in third year, and then Maryborough, the Goldfields hub, and then Mildura in fourth year, and then back to Bendigo for half of this year. And my time out here sort of converted me to the regional lifestyle. So I decided to come back out here as an intern, planning, well, I've got a job here next year as well. And I'm in the future looking at pursuing a career in O&G. Yeah.
I'm Maddie. I'm the second year psychiatry registrar in Mildura. I'm an Adelaide girl, so I was born and went to school there, and I was a Monash Med undergrad. I'm a non-ERC student, so I surprisingly did a lot of rural rotations for a non-ERC student. I did my third year Metro, but my fourth year I did in Mildura and Swan Hill. And I did 3 of my 6 fifth year placements in Mildura and 1 in Bendigo, just because I liked it so much. And then I did my internship in Mildura and first and second year reg years in Mildura as well.
So we'll just start off with some of the accommodation and living questions. So if someone can just answer what it's like living in a share house at the rural sites, and how you go about travelling to the hospitals without a car.
So I didn't have a car for third year and halfway through this year, and it was actually like totally fine going to placement because they always put you really close. So third year I stayed at Lister House in Bendigo, and I could walk to the hospital. And then in fourth year I lived in Bendigo and just commuted down on the train to Castlemaine. With the share houses in Mildura, at the moment I've got 2 housemates and they're great. We have a really great family house, big backyard. That's really cool.
Can I just say also, it's really weird, like when you go into this share house, possibly with people that you don't know, you're like, what am I in for? And I was put in with these like 2 like kind of semi-racist country guys, and I was like, what is happening to my life? And it's really interesting because you actually wind up being really good friends with these people that you otherwise would not probably have made the time of day to talk to. And those are people that are like still friends now, and we like did our internships together, and we like Skype each other once a week, even though we're all in different places. I think that was one thing that was actually people are really apprehensive about. They're like, wow, I'm going to this house with these people I don't know and might not like, but it's actually like a good thing to be with people that aren't like you. Hi, Safia. We're both in Mildura.
I'm Molly. I was in Wonthaggi and Warragul in last year for fourth year. I lived at home when I was in Wonthaggi because that's where I'm from, but in Warragul, I found it like the second semester when I was in Warragul was so much better learning wise, because you're in that environment with a bunch of other students and you can sort of do a lot of OSCEs together. And or even just, if you've got a question, someone's there to sort of answer it or talk about it with you. So I found that really helpful from, obviously not living in student accommodation to going to living in student accommodation. I'm really glad I was there like second semester, especially before OSCE, so that we could do a lot of practice and stuff. But yeah, of course, it doesn't get overwhelming. Like you're not talking medicine all the time, but which I was worried about. But no, it was a really good experience being in accommodation with everyone. Yeah, and everyone was super lovely.
do you have a list of which GP clinics are assigned to which hospitals / clinical schools? So I think this person is talking metro. So Mark mentioned earlier that for rural, you get to preference 5 of the sites. And from memory, in metro, you don't get to choose. They gave us an option really early in the year to organise our own placement. And then apart from that, you don't get to preference, you just get logged with a GP, and they are all across the city. So it's not really convenient to organise your accommodation in regards to that. And following on from that, so we'll get Caroline and Anna to answer this one. So how did you manage living arrangements when you were at different sites for each rotation in metro?
So I was at Peninsula, and so I was pretty much at the same hospital network the whole year. They do have different rotations that can send you down to Rosebud or Hastings for women's and peds. So that was a bit of a longer drive, but yeah, otherwise you're pretty much in and around Frankston Hospital.
So for 3B and 4C, I was mostly at Dandenong and MMC, just by luck. So I've been pretty lucky in the fact that they've all been quite close to each other, but I know a lot of people haven't been as lucky. So just when you're choosing a place to stay, a lot of people find it easier to pick a place that's kind of central to all of the areas. So for example, a lot of students choose to stay around Clayton just because it's closer to MMC and it's not too far from, for example, Casey or Alfred. And then with the GP placement, they usually try to place you somewhere that's nearby your current residence. So as long as you update that on WES, I think, they'll try to find a place that's nearby, like around 10-15 minutes.
Yeah, and other than the Rosebud and Hastings ones, all the Frankston sites are accessible via train, because I took the train every day.
Now I have a question on just comparing the content and teaching in rural sites to metro. So I'll just briefly say what the teaching like is in metro. So in metro, you have 4 rotations, and they're 9-week rotations. For peds, women's, and psych, you have a 1-week introductory week of lectures, and that's at the very start of each rotation. For GP, you have 2 days of teaching every week, and that's throughout the entire 9 weeks. So that just gives you an idea of what the teaching is like for metro. And then throughout as well, like particularly, all of the rotations except for GP, you'll also have kind of tutorials depending on your site, tutorials by consultants, and particularly at peds, you'll be allocated a tutorial group, and women's actually as well. If you're at MMC, you'll be allocated a tutorial group and they'll go through teaching, but I'll get someone to talk about the rural teaching.
I'm based in Bendigo this year for 4C, and our teaching is mostly at night. So on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday night, we have classes between 4 and 7 p.m. So each day is a different discipline. So Monday is psych, Tuesday is GP, Wednesdays paediatrics, and Thursdays is women's. It's not always for those 3 hours. It might just be 1 hour, some weeks 2 hours, some weeks it is the 3 hours. So that's mostly what our teaching is. And depending on the rotation, you might have some added teaching, like a sim session for women's to learn how to do speculums or something like that. But that's usually just a one-off thing 1 week.
I touched on this with the 3rd years, but I just want to touch on it again. There is quite a big difference between the way 4th years taught rurally and metropolitan compared to 3rd year. And I think it's important to keep in mind that everyone, learns a lot no matter where you are. And as an intern looking back, I felt I had a lot of stress about the differences in the course curriculum, but I found that sort of at the end point, we all learnt the same content at a different pace and in a different way. For me, I started off in GP. I was getting my hub days on a Wednesday, and I just felt like all the non-GP curriculum was so foreign and in the distance, but it worked out that in my 2nd semester, I had a lot of time invested in that. And so you do feel like you're missing out in some ways, but everyone eventually covers the same curriculum at a different pace.
Well, thanks for that, guys. The next question's quite specific. So this person's asked that they want to specialise in psychiatry and which hospital offers the best psych rotation. So I'd say in Metro, all the psych rotations are relatively the same. It's a psych ward, just at the varying different hospitals. Does anyone want to talk about psych in rural areas?
Very much so. So I thought a lot of my psych rotation. So I went into psych expecting to dislike it. So at LRH, there's the high dependency unit Flynn, and whether you're in Warrigal or Sale, you'll end up coming to LRH, at least for part of it, to go to Flynn. And in Flynn, it's very good. So a good thing, in my opinion, about psych is that a large amount of it is relatively subjective. Like if you know like the DSM criteria, you can do a really good job of picking things, and your opinion is important about whether or not people seem to exhibit those traits. Obviously the consultants can do it better than you, but your opinion is valuable. You can go around and do tasks like do collateral histories of patients, actually like see if their stories are true. You get to speak to patients. Like I thought at first, like, how am I going to like pick up the subtle symptoms of, like, I don't know, schizophrenia? How am I going to know if there's a delusion? But like it's so overt, especially in Flynn. And like if you just want a buddy or on your own, you can just go and speak to patients. So you get good exposure. You're actually useful on the team, and you can basically do as much as you like. So really big talk up for LRH, which encompasses Sale, Warrigal, Traralgon.
And I suppose this is a bit of a spruik up the Mildura as well, but I guess the answer to the question probably is I liked my 4C Mildura psych rotation so much that 5 years later I'm still here. And we are accredited, so you can do all 5 years of your training here. And we only have one registrar at the moment, which is me, so it's probably not that difficult to get a job here either. And people are really supportive. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. If you already like psych, it's just heaps of fun.
For the person who asked that question, I don't know if you're from Metro or a rural area, but I'm from a small country town, Wonthaggi, which its catchment area was Flynn, and Flynn was the ward that I was on for my psych rotation, and I knew personally people on that ward the whole time I was there. So and it made it difficult. I sort of missed out on quite a few histories because I'd see someone, that I knew from school, and I'd have to go, oh, I can't really go in there. So maybe I'd suggest if you're from a town, like a small town, or that your town goes into the area, maybe try and avoid that, because it didn't like restrict my psych rotation a heap, but it just I maybe might have missed out on a few opportunities, a few histories and that sort of thing because of that issue. Yeah.
Also, if you're that person and you're thinking about coming to a rural area and you would like to get in contact with me and you like Mildura, then please feel free to.
We have a question for MRH, probably Mark or Laura. How many students go rural in fourth year?
Sure. So we've got 94 places, between 94 and 100 spots for 4C. So again, the Northwest, the ERC students get allocated there first, if you like, because that's all they can go. But yes, there's actually more spots in 4C than there is in 3B.
Excellent, thanks, Mark. I also have another question. So this person's done 3B in Mildura. Where should they, well, essentially, what is a good place to go in 4C if they've done a 3B in Mildura? If someone wants to answer that one.
Are they an ERC student? It depends.
Good.
If they're an ERC student, we encourage ERC students who've done 3B in Mildura or Bendigo to do a semester at the other site for their regional hospital rotation, and also to also obviously experience other sites in the Northwest. So it does depend if they're an ERC student.
The person who has asked is a non-ERC student.
Okay, so we offer exceptional placements all over Victoria.
I think Maddie would say stay in Mildura.
Come back, why not? We've got great
Absolutely.
I guess it's just a personal preference. If you feel that there's something that you didn't get to experience in Mildura, and there are other sites that may offer something different to what Mildura has in terms of whether that's specialties or whether that's experience in the region, then you can choose a different place. But I think that's a personal preference.
And the beauty of, sorry.
So I was just going to say that GP rotation isn't going to be in Mildura. We don't have any GP practices up there.
Yeah.
So that will be in any other part of the state.
And the beauty of our new 4C education model is that now the school has opened up completely, so they can actually do an 18-week semester in one site and for their regional hospital rotation, and their GP rotation in a completely different site. So they can actually do different rotations in different regions and different sites.
Great, thanks Laura and Mark for that one. Another question for you guys. If we were to preference Peninsula and not be allocated it, would we be pushed metro before being pushed rural, since Peninsula is considered a metro site? Yeah,
so this is a tricky one to answer, but it's not necessarily. So yes, Peninsula is a metro site, but lots of different factors go into whether you end up in rural or not. It's actually probably more about contacting Jodie Vicker's team, so Sharon you, on the Med Admin Year 4 email address.
Because that's a step 1 opting in issue. So if you missed out on, is the question if you miss out on Peninsula or if you miss out on rural?
Peninsula.
Yeah, Peninsula.
So if you missed out on Peninsula at step 1, you could either end up in the rural pool or the metro pool. So, yeah, it's a Jodie Vickers question because it's a step 1 process.
No worries, thank you. Okay, so we've got a couple more questions in the chat. So if someone from Mildura and Bendigo just wants to tell us their experiences on their placements, particularly this person's asked about peds and ONG, and kind of how many patients or what variety of patients you would see in each of the sites.
I'm happy to talk to ONG, something I'm interested in now. As a 4th year, I started off in Maryborough, and a lot of the GP sites in the Northwest, the GPs work as GP obstetricians. A lot of the peripheral hospitals do offer GP obstetrician services. So that means that whilst you're on your GP rotation, if you're interested in ONG, you often can get good exposure to antenatal settings and often to births. Not so much to the specialist gynae sort of services, but for example, at Maryborough Hospital, they had visiting gynecologists that did come and do operations there. And then that transitioned well into my time in Mildura, where they have quite a small women's ward, but I found that I had no difficulty getting births, and I still got to see some, I got to see assisted births, I got to see a twin delivery. Of course, it just depends on what you come across, but I found that my ONG experiences in 4th year in the rural hub, probably compared to a lot of my colleagues in the city, I had a lot more hands-on experience, and that sort of led well into 5th year and finding out what I want to do.
I had a very similar experience to Katie. So I was in Castlemaine for my GP rotation, and there was 3 GPOs at my clinic, and so I got to see lots of antenatal. I got to see 1 birth, and now I'm in Mildura, and I've seen lots of normal vaginal births, lots of assisted. You're assisting in like Caesars. Yeah, heaps of experience.
I guess speaking for the other side of the state, I was in Leongatha. With the model we sort of had when I did it, you did go up to Warragul for a bit of O&G, but you also did a lot of it where you were placed. So I was in Leongatha. There's lots of GP obstetricians, but even out of the curricula, there's a lot of GP anaesthetists. And they also have sort of admitting rights at the urgent cares there. So as part of your GP rotation, you're very likely to also get possibly some anaesthetics exposure and also some ED exposure ahead of final year. And depending on the GP clinics, a lot of the GPs are sort of rural generalists, so they do a lot of extra stuff, so a lot of sort of skin cancer clinics and things. So you get sort of a lot of procedural stuff, a lot of suturing experience, which I don't think get as much of in the city.
I think in terms of peds, I was in Mildura for peds, and probably of all my clinical experiences, probably Mildura has the least to offer in terms of the paediatric ward, just because of the size of the hospital. That doesn't mean you don't get peds exposure though, but it's not like doing your peds placement at the Monash Children's Hospital, where you're obviously going to come across lots of different peds cases. I found that in Mildura, you see the common things happen commonly. So you see the children coming through with bronchiolitis, but generally the inpatient load isn't very high on the paediatrics ward in Mildura, and they often get shipped out either to Bendigo or the city if they're unwell. But I did get to see the common peds conditions, which are really what you're assessed on as a student. And I got to see a lot of peds in my GP rotation as well.
I'll just say one more thing. I think one good thing is my friend this year who was in Swan Hill for her GP, she got all of her births before even starting her women's rotation. So she got all her normal vaginals. I think she got, 1 or 2 Caesars as well. And it was the same for me when I was in Wonthaggi. I got all bar one of my births, just because if you take initiative and go into the hospital and let the doctors know that, you're keen to see that sort of thing. And obviously you have to, because it's in your logbook. It can obviously make women's rotation a lot less stressful as well, because you're not sort of trying to, hurry around and get all your births.
Great, thanks everyone. I've got a couple of questions for MRH. I think Mark spoke about this before. We had another question about how many placements are for non-ERC students. So was it 30 ERC students and around 90 rural placements in total?
In year 4, they're actually between 95 and 100 placements. And yeah, so there's still the 30 ERCs, give or take. Some people coming back from intermission, whatever. But yeah, so there's more opportunity in year 4 than there was in year 3.
Yeah, perfect. And then does being on a rural site in 3B make you less likely to be forced into rural in 4C?
Okay, so we would love people to opt into rural for 2 years in a row, because we know you'll have a great time. If you've done 3B in rural and we're short, and if we're short in 4C, we're unlikely to co-opt you or conscript you into 4C rural, if that makes sense. There's no guarantees, but you're unlikely.
But should you be lucky enough to end up in rural for a second year,
yeah, that's right,
then we will welcome you.
Don't feel like second-class citizens. Just keep coming back.
I was conscripted in 4C and it changed my life, and I'm still here. So
Absolutely. I actually thought that was a typo on that question, but
thank you. I have a question. So I'm a bit confused about Metro 4C. Are there 4 rotations within a single clinical school, or completely random? So in Metro 4C, you get to choose if you want to be Metro or rural, but you're randomly allocated to the sites for women's, peds, GP and psych. So you don't get to choose, and you can have rotations that are split in half as well. So you might be at Monash Children's for peds, you might be at Monash Children's for 4 weeks and then somewhere else for 4 weeks, and similarly with women's. So it's completely random, which is why a lot of people live in a central place in the city, so that way it's they can get to eastern sites and Monash sites. Obviously, we don't know how that's going to go next year, and maybe you will be at one clinical school just with COVID, but we can't say. So then we have another question. How do the metro and rural students think COVID will affect 4C placements this year, and what reductions did they have this year and were they rectified? So we obviously can't really talk about what effect COVID will have on placements next year, because we don't know what it's going to look like. We could eliminate COVID by December, or we could have a third wave. We have no idea. So it's hard to comment on what placements will look like. However, we do have students here who have gone through COVID. So what we might do is we have Anna, who's a Metro student, a year 4 Metro student this year. So she can talk about what it's been like Metro, and then we'll get everyone else to talk about what 4C has looked like rurally.
Yep, okay. So I was placed, as I said before, mostly, this was meant to be random, but I was mostly in Dandenong and MMC, and GP, I'm like around that area, like Clayton area as well. So for the first rotation, we were able to go ahead as normal, as I believe most people would have, because COVID was had less of an impact at that time. And then from rotation 2, it really depended on which discipline you were in. So I was in GP, and because the GPs were struggling at that time, we were all pulled off placement. But I know some of my friends who were on psychiatry, they remained on placement for a good 6 weeks, I would say, at least. So that's semester 1. And then semester 2, they decided to kind of rejig it so that we would be able to experience all of our placements. So instead of having 9-week placements, we now have 6-week placements so that they can fit 3 disciplines into the second semester. And I've been pretty lucky in that I've been able to be on placement for the whole 6 weeks of all of for each discipline. So that was psychiatry, GP, and peds. With psychiatry, it depended on like how much exposure you got, depended on which clinical school you were in. So I was at Dandenong, and Dandenong and MMC both had the full 6 weeks, whereas I know Alfred, because they were having a bit of a COVID cluster, the students there only got 2 weeks. So it really depends on the specialty and where you're at. And I think that would be the same for like all of the rotations, really. It was just so variable because the clusters were appearing in different areas at different times in the different health services, and each health service was kind of impacted differently. So they did try to adjust, but not everyone got their full placement.
Great.
In terms of plan, sorry. I was just going to say, what made it really easy was that the admin and the staff from Monash were just absolutely really lovely and trying to make the most experience that we could get, and also being very understanding that, you know, some of us wanted to be home as well. So we got taken off placement for a little bit, but then could come back on. When we came back on, they were really diligent in trying to make sure we got the most opportunity as possible. When we moved on into our next placement, they were asking us, what did we feel like we didn't get? So in my GP placement, I felt like I didn't get enough women's when I was in women's. So they gave me more women's clinics to be able to join in. They did that individually for each person to work out what everyone needed. And every single week they updated us with updates. We have frequent Zoom meetings just to be on top of everything. And they've made it really easy for us in that way.
So I've been placed in the Northwest. For me, I was on GP for the first semester and we weren't taken off at all. So I was on placement for the full 18 weeks. And for semester 2, I've been at Bendigo for specialties. And again, I've been on placement for the whole 18 weeks. There has been some minor changes in terms of community placements and stuff that are outside of Bendigo Health. So we haven't been able to do things like headspace on psych rotation, or some of the paediatric clinics or child and maternal health that we might have joined in with traditionally. on other rotations, but mostly we've had placement throughout. There has been some adjustments in terms of number of students on wards. So say for peds, there's only able to be 2 students on the paediatric ward. So one on the child and adolescent ward and one on SCABU. So things like that have adjusted a bit, but mostly everyone's getting a good amount of placement still.
Yep, so I've got a question about males doing O&G rurally. So they've heard that many O&G patients decline having male students in delivery and in the rooms. I think maybe Marcus, would you be able to comment on O&G rurally as a male student?
Just like to start by clarifying I'm in fact a male student. So it was completely fine. I think I had 2 patients in the entire time who ever declined anything. And I think one of them declined one of the midwife students who was female as well. So I think I had exactly 1 decline on account of being male. It really was not a barrier at LRH. I think I've heard similar things from fellow male students.
I think everywhere there are going to be female patients who prefer not to have male practitioners. This is not my personal experience, but my friend Sam was here as a student in 4th year, delivered lots of babies, and has come back and is now going to be an unaccredited registrar here. So he clearly got enough experience, I guess, as a 4th year student rurally to make him want to be an O&G registrar. I think there are barriers for male students, but I don't think they're different between rural and metro.
I agree with what Katie said. I had friends when I was on my metro rotation who were male, and they weren't allowed in rooms, and sometimes they struggled to get birth. So it very much depends on the women that are having babies at that point in time, and less about what hospital you're at or where you are in Victoria.
And it can also be a little bit more difficult in some metro areas just because of the cultural background of a lot of people. I know I had a friend who was based at Dandenong, and because where they were placed, there was quite a large Muslim population. It just, males can't be there to be culturally respectful. It's not something that you can do. So they actually had to organise privately to get most of their O&G time. So it really depends on the cultural background of your patient population as well, I think.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, as a female, we also get turned away from patients. So it's not necessarily just what sort of gender you are, but some patients just don't want a medical student in there. So, yeah.
Thanks for that, everyone. I just have a quick question for Mark. Is it possible for a non-ERC student to get Bendigo if they preference it?
Absolutely. As I said, there are 30 ERC students and there are 96 spots. So each in Bendigo, I think there are 15 spots per rotation. And in Mildura, there are about 12. So each 6 months, there are 27 spots that are available for hospital rotation. And in the GP community practice hubs, there are 24 spots per 6 months. So in the northwest. So yes, absolutely.
Excellent. And just following on for that, how easy is it for a non-ERC student who is placed in Mildura for 3B to get Bendigo for 4C? To the non-ERC?
Yeah. So again, it's the same process. It's preferencing, it's special requirements, it's giving us your background as to why you want something. We do our best to achieve your highest possible preference. It's no guarantee, but yes, we try really hard.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I don't think Kelly and I have any more questions that are in the chat. So if anyone has any quick questions they'd like to ask, we can sum up and get Helen to close everything for us.
Can I just add something quickly? I think I touched on this in my in the third year talk as well, but fourth year can be a really challenging year. And there are a lot of highs of fourth year, but also there are some challenges and the course content feels quite heavy. I encourage everyone as they go into next year as well, no matter where you're placed, just make the most of the opportunities that come. And if you're regional and you feel like you need support, there's some really, School of Rural Health have been working really hard to put structures in place to support you. So make sure you reach out if you do need it.